Parshas Nitzavim, as we approach the Yemei Hadin, I wanted to discuss the topic of shame and the healthy way that we should feel shame over Aveiros that we do, and hopefully come to do tshuva for them. So the Torah tells us in the beginning of Parshas Nitzavim, it's really Atem Nitzavim Hayom Kulchem B'fnei Hashem Elkeichem. Everyone is gathered together before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, La'avrecha Bris Hashem Elokecha, to go through a new bris with Hashem. Hashem is making a new bris, a new covenant with the Jewish people. And the Medrash in the Yalkut Shimoni tells us, in fact, that there were 3 times Hashem made a bris with Klal Yisrael. One time is when they first left Mitzrayim. One time was at Chorev, at the time of Matan Torah. And then there was a third one made at the time of this time, right before they entered Eretz Yisrael, at the end of Moshe's life, in the Arvos Moav. The Medrash explains, why did they need a new bris now? Because the bris they made at Chorev, at Har Sinai, was batal when they said, Elohecha Yisrael. When they did the Chet HaEgel, then it nullified the bris made at Har Sinai, and therefore they needed a new bris. So my Rebbe Rabbi Lubin writes in his Sefer Chiddushei HaLev from Ravenach Zatzal, he says it can't be that the bris was actually batal, the bris at Chorev, because we know that the Torah references it many times. It's clear in Sefer Devarim that Hashem says that it wasn't just for the people at Har Sinai. Today you're all living with this bris. This is a bris for you too. The Torah exhorts in many places in Sefer Devarim that bris is eternal. So what does it mean that the bris was batal when they said Elohecha Yisrael? So the Reshiva, it must be that it was never batal, but Klal Yisrael felt it was batal. They had such a shame over what they did at the Chet HaEgel that they needed a new bris. Hashem had to show them that you're still my people, and you're still the chosen people of mine. And the bris came with it with some new things like Arevim Zelazeh. But at the same time, the main reason for a new bris was to be mechazik Klal Yisrael, that they shouldn't be sinning, that they should still feel they have a special bris with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Shiva asks, why can't Hashem just tell them and assure them and promise them the bris is not batal? It seems that it wouldn't have worked. It seemed as they had such a shame over the Chet HaEgel that even if Hashem would have assured the bris is not batal, they wouldn't be able to believe it. They needed to have a new bris based on post Chet HaEgel. Rashiva said, we find, in fact, this shame for the Chet HaEgel even 1,000 years later in the times of the Galus Yavan. In the times of the Greeks, that it references in the Medrash. The pasuk says, V'choshech ha'penei tahom, and it says that they darkened the eyes of the Jewish people. They made a gezerah that they wrote on the horn of a shore, that the horn of a cow, the Jewish people have no chelek with the God of Yisrael. And this was something which reminded them of the Chet HaEgel, was very painful for them. And it seems like this was a very, very difficult gezer for Klal Yisrael. It seems it was so successful, it was from the most painful ever. That's why, in fact, it's referenced in this pasuk. That's why it's in the Medrash as the darkness of Klal Yisrael. So she was, I don't understand. It's 1,000 years later. Klal Yisrael has done tshuva. Hashem says, "Achti kidvarecha." Hashem gave them the Mishkan. Hashem brought them into Eretz Yisrael. Gave them the Beis Hamikdash. We see even after all that, there's still that tremendous shame over the Chet HaEgel. And as much as they know that Hashem has forgiven them and Hashem has kept them as the chosen people, it's something which they always had that shame, even 1,000 years later, appreciating what it was. Maybe Hashem has rejected us as a result of this. So one point to make is just the fact that we tend to think some people that we're able to overcome any emotion if we put our mind to it, but it's not true. You see that they had this shame and they weren't able to overcome it. Maybe, as we'll see, maybe it wouldn't have been the right thing to overcome this shame. I take us in a different direction than the Chiddushei HaLev. Really, why did they feel such a strong sense of shame, and why don't we? How come we don't feel shame over the Chet HaEgel that we did? How come they felt such a strong shame, and how come they couldn't get past it at that time? So I want to explore from a book. It's called From Boys to Men. It's written by a Dr. Shlomo Zimmerman, but very rare to have a book so closely combed over by Gedolei Yisrael. It's a very sensitive topic that it's dealing with. And it's dealing with how to teach your sons about the topic of Taivas Nashim. And it really gets into what I think is a very important thing. I think sometimes there are conflicts between what we see in human psychology and what the Torah tells us about the nature of the human being. And sometimes we need to really figure out how these two go together. Obviously, there's no stiras between truth and truth, but when the psychology is true, we need to figure out how it meshes. I think sometimes people just try to ignore the psychology, they end up bitter afterwards, ends up much worse. I've discussed this with Dr. Goldman, that I think that it's really would be important for a Talmid Chacham and a psychologist to sit down and put together a framework rather than having every firm psychologist has to try his best to figure it out. But regardless, anyway, this book gets into an area and explores it properly. He was talking about the concept of shame when a person doesn't have air. There's a concept in psychology called toxic shame, that a person really feels like garbage about themselves. They really feel terrible over the things that they think about themselves and the things that they've done, and it can really hold a person down in life. A person can have a life full of successful accomplishments and still feel like trash deep down without realizing it's really coming from this sense of shame, of feeling bad about oneself. He wrote about the dangers of shame, especially in the areas of Tovah, and he brought it to Rav Aaron Feldman, and Rav Aaron Feldman said, there's a concept of busha in the Torah. There's a concept of feeling bad and feeling ashamed of yourself before HaKadosh Baruch Hu when you do the wrong thing. It's one of the mailas of the Jewish people is that we have busha. So he tried using Brene Brown's idea. Guilt is, I made a mistake. Shame is, I am a mistake. Rav Aaron Feldman's like, that's charata, that's busha. That's not the Torah's hashkafa. You got to do a deeper dive in psychology and hashkafa and get it clear. So he really did, and he spends a few pages exploring what healthy shame is and what unhealthy shame is. So he built an exploration based on the words of Rabbeinu Yonah in the beginning of the Shari Avoda, very famous piece. Rabbeinu Yonah talks about the Pesach Rishon, that step one in being a proper Oved Hashem is to appreciate our value as a person, to appreciate the value of us and of our ancestors, our greatness, our ancestors' greatness, and our belovedness before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when a person appreciates their greatness, then that holds a person back from Aveiros. When they have a desire to do something which is inappropriate, they're just embarrassed. This is who I am. This is who my ancestors were. How could I do such a thing? That shame prevents them from doing sin. As opposed to if Chas v'Shalom, a person doesn't appreciate his mailas and the mailas of his forefathers, it's very easy for him to go in bad directions and do bad things. If a person doesn't value himself, then he could just do whatever he wants. If a person values and appreciates his greatness, the greatness that he came from, then that will cause him to refrain from doing Aveiros. He writes that this will give us a sense that we can achieve greatness within our abilities. Hashem only expects us to do according to our abilities, and that's all that our forefathers did, and that's what we're expected to do. So we can accomplish great things. That should be our first starting point and our motivation in Avodas Hashem. So in other words, Rabbeinu Yonah is teaching us that a person has healthy shame that comes from a sense that I'm better than this. The more a person feels the greatness and appreciates the greatness, and the more they appreciate how devastatingly bad an Aveira is, the more ashamed they will be to do it, and the more shame they'll feel if they do it. As opposed to the unhealthy shame that a person could feel by feeling like garbage, is a totally different type. It's coming from an unhealthy place, and the healthy shame comes from a healthy place. The way, to use Dr. Zimmerman's words, healthy shame comes from a connection to one's true self. Pathological shame is related in estrangement from one's true self. Healthy shame comes from not living up to one's true self. Pathological shame comes from living as one's false self, the false messages that we've received. So what I take from this idea is that the more that a person is in touch with their greatness, the more sensitive they are to Aveira, the more shame they feel. And that's why Klal Yisrael that's why we felt this back in the times of the Oven. That's why Klal Yisrael, they couldn't get past it. How could you get past it? How could you get past that shame for betraying HaKadosh Baruch Hu? I was thinking of a mashal. Let's say Chas v'Shalom, somebody would cheat on their wife, and then she forgives him. Would a healthy person not feel shame forever? I did tshuva, I got mechila, I'm finished. Person forever feels shame. How could I have betrayed my wife? How could I have done such a thing? It's so beneath me. I'm so much better than that. The more they appreciate their greatness, and the more they appreciate their love for their wife, and the more they appreciate how bad it is, the more shame they would feel. I think that's something that Klal Yisrael was in touch with, and it's something that we need to get in touch with. We need to appreciate our greatness. We need to appreciate what it means to do the wrong thing, how big of a deal it is, and realize we're above it. May Hashem help us refine our sensitivities, develop our appreciation of what's true and what's false, and Mitzvah Hashem will be zocheh to Kesivah, Vachasimah, Tovah in the coming year. Wish you a good Shabbos.